This is part 3 to building a responsive testimonial slider in the browser. We've already worked on the HTML and CSS in part 1 and part 2, and now we're going to finish off with the interactivity. Currently, when you click, nothing happens, and we want to go ahead and get this final solution working. So we can go ahead and hop in Visual Studio Code to get started. I have the final solution here, but it'll also be added to my GitHub as a repository, so be sure to take a look in the description below with a link to my GitHub to get access. This course, as I mentioned earlier, this is a beginner course, so we're going to be going through the JavaScript and explaining it as we go, and I'll try to be as comprehensive as I can with that. So we can go ahead and get started. Essentially what we want to do is, and we can go ahead and just take this from the solution just for saving some time. We want to go ahead and create an array of objects. So this is a data structure. We have an array, which is that bracket, and then we have curly braces here with each object containing data about each testimonial. So I've gone ahead and used const testimonials. We're using const because this information is not going to change. We're not, reassigning this, so we're not using let. We're just doing const. These are the testimonials that we're going to be using, and so I'm going ahead and putting that here. So it's just an array of objects, and each object contains a key and value of some of the data. So you'll likely recognize this from the HTML and the CSS as we've been working on it. The image, the quote, the business, the name of the cat, the position or the role, and then the description, the alt description for the image. Now we can go ahead and get started with the JavaScript, and we can go ahead and say, let index equals 0. And so essentially this is, this index is going to allow us to keep track of the testimonials when we're clicking the button. And so we're saying create a variable, set it to 0, and then we're going to go ahead and work on adding the image element. So we want to find the image element in the HTML so then we can modify it. So we're going to say const image L, and we're using document, which is an object, and we're using a method get element by ID, and we're going to put the ID. So this property we can use to capture the image, and we're capturing it by its ID, and you'll see that in the HTML. If we look at the solution for the HTML, you'll see that the image has an ID of image, and so we're using that for the JavaScript. I mentioned with the classes, you can think classes with styles or CSS and IDs with JavaScript. You can use IDs for styling with CSS, but more often than not, it's better to use a class because that's reusable. ID is only associated to one element, and so that's going to be more useful for JavaScript, like in this instance where we're targeting it. So const image L and get an element by ID image. Then we can go ahead and work on the function. This is the tool we're going to use. We're going to run this function, this action, whenever we click the button. So we want to create that, and then we want to use it whenever we select the previous button or the next button. We want that to work. And so to do that, we can say update function, update testimonial, and we're going to say I, and we're going to say within this function, we're going to say const testimonial equals testimonials I. So within the array of testimonials, we have each individual testimonials, which we're calling testimonial. And so we're just using I as the index to pull that. So testimonial I, we're just grabbing the current index, current testimonial. Now we can go ahead and work on the image. And so essentially what we're doing here is we want the image to fully load before showing it in the browser. And so I'm creating, a temporary image with an image class, new image. We're building it. This won't be shown in the browser. It's just on our end just to make sure the image loads without, causing any flickering. So we're going to say temporary image, and that's going to be on load. We want to say we're using an arrow function here. It's very, it's just another way to write with some additional abilities, but an arrow function is, the same in some ways to writing just function. It's just a different way of writing it with this, equal sign and then the greater than sign. With, of course, there's some extra abilities to it, but just to keep it simple, just another way to write a function. And then we can go ahead and say temporary image on load. We want to image L, the image element dot source. We want to say testimonial. We want to set it to testimonial.image. And then we want to say image L dot alt. We want to say testimonial dot alt, like so. So we're setting the alternate text in the image, and then we're going to say temporary image dot source equals testimonial image, like so. So once the image is loading, we're setting that in the browser, and that's what we're doing here. Now, for the final part of the function, we want to add the text. So the text in the individual objects in each testimonial, we want to add that to the screen or the browser. So we're saying document.get element by ID, and we're just grabbing that for each one, and we're using text content property to set the data. So we're saying we're using a template literal. We're saying testimonial.quote, and then we're going to put quotes here. So you'll see the quote is wrapped as a string in the data, but we want to have the quote also show up in the browser, and so we're adding that in addition. And so we're going to set the quote. And for text content, we're saying, every element node in the browser, the document object model has a text content property that holds the text inside of it. And so we're setting that, but once we capture it with get element by ID. And so next we can go to document.get element by ID, and we're going to say business. So we're just going down the list here. We're just capturing each thing. Business.text content equals testimonial.business, and then we'll say document.get element by ID. We're going to grab the name, and we're going to say text content equals testimonial name. We're going to do document.get element by ID, and we're going to grab the role or the position dot text content. So it's a lot of repetition, just to get comfortable with everything. Testimonial.role, and there you go. That's our function, and we can go ahead. We can just make this double quotes. You can use single or double just as long as you're consistent. And I'll make it double quotes. Okay. So now we have the function. Now we want to use the function when we click the buttons. So we're going to say document.get element by ID. We're grabbing the previous button with prev. Then we're going to add an event listener, and we're going to say when the button is clicked, on click, use an arrow function. When the button's clicked, run this function. That's what we're saying. And we're going to say index equals index -1 plus testimonials dot length. And then we're going to say modulus testimonials dot length. And we're doing this with the modulus so that we can wrap around. Once we can't just keep hitting negative, or going -1, -1, -1. We'll eventually jump off the array, and so we don't want to do that, and so that's why we're using modulus here. The same is going to happen with hitting +1, +1, +1. The array has a length of 2, starting at length of 3. but it starts at 0. So 0, 1, 2, that's the index position. It has a length of 3, but we start at 0. And so that's just how arrays work. And then once we click, we want to say update. We want to run our function that we just made, update testimonial index. So whichever index we're at, we want to display all of this testimonial data. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So it's just essentially just a copy and paste. And we want to switch that instead to plus, and we want to change the ID from previous to next instead. And those are the only changes. And now we should see, so we got the solution. And then if we go to our sandbox, you'll see that that's updating as well with all of the text.